Australia's newly elected government has increased the 2030 target for cutting carbon emissions. Such a step brings the country more in line with the climate commitments of other economies that are part of the Paris Climate Accord. Australia has now said that it would cut carbon emissions by 43% from the 2005 levels by 2030. Former Prime Minister Scott Morrison's government had pledged to cut 26 to 28% emissions. The newly elected Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has taken up the challenge to focus on the climate policies, as promised in his election manifesto.
We announced last December what our policy framework would be. At that time, we released the most comprehensive modelling of any policy by any opposition since Federation. What we didn't do was set a target and then work out how to get there. What we did was work out what good policy looked like, and it happened to come out with a 43% target by 2030. What business has been crying out for is investment certainty, the certainty that they need to invest over a longer time frame than the political cycle of 3 years.
Currently, Australia is the world's highest per capita carbon emitter. It is the world's top exporter of coal and liquefied natural gas. Under the previous government, Australia made slow progress in its climate commitments. It had no clear energy and climate policy to encourage renewable energy commitments. When the United Nations Climate Summit was held in Glasgow last year, Scott Morrison was criticised for failing to set a more ambitious target to cut emissions. This was when the US, Canada, the EU, Britain and Japan had sharply stepped up their climate pledges. Canada promised to reduce emissions by 40% by 2030 from the 2005 levels. The United States set a target of up to 52%, the latest push to cut emissions coming at a time when Australia is facing a power crisis as well that was triggered by planned as well as unplanned coal-fired generator outages. Meanwhile, residents of Sydney have been urged to conserve power as much as possible. This is to avert blackouts. Australia's climate change and energy minister has told households to save power without sacrificing essentials like heating. The power crunch is likely to be felt more during the evenings. This is when output from solar and wind farms falls and people head home and use their appliances. And with us on the broadcast this minute is political analyst Peter Oxford, with us from Sydney, Australia. Thanks very much for being here with us, Peter. As of now, Australia is the world's highest per capita carbon emitter. It is the world's top exporter of coal and liquefied natural gas. These ambitious goals are great, but what is your assessment of the plan to reach these goals?
Well, Australia has an energy crisis. The Albanese government is starting to provide a framework for renewable energy for storage and transmission. It'll also create hundreds of thousands of jobs across the country, and particularly in Australia's regions. Everybody is wanting to see how the new administration will be able to reach its new goal on climate change by 2030.
What can the government do to fight the current power crisis that it is grappling with, while at the same time fighting the climate crisis, which is a much needed balancing act and a challenge that countries around the world are facing?
Well, the Albanese government is ready to clean up the past mistakes of the previous government. The Australian people are angry about the past government not taking enough action when it comes to climate change. And that's why the Australian people spoke at the last election and voted in this government. They want change. The updated submission sends a message to the world that we're ready to take on reduced emissions and rejoin the world in cutting emissions along with India and Japan.
The kind of criticism that the Scott Morrison government had faced over its climate policy, Anthony Albanese has tapped onto that and has promised that climate change will be a top priority. But if you were to compare, as of now, the promises that have been made by this administration, what is your assessment on that front?
Well, I'm sure this won't be the first major policy to come out of the government. The government is looking at short-term investments, but you'll get a long-term benefit because they're cheaper and cleaner energy will flow well into the future. It's clear the government will be hitting these issues head on. We're ready to make change, and it's great to see that this government is actually making a difference already in such short term of being in election, being voted in.
Peter, thanks very much for being here with us and sharing those perspectives.
Thank you.
WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.